The war in Gaza, as horrible as it is just a preview. It ain't the real thing. This is a trailer for the actual movie. And that film is going to be bigger, it's going to be worse, and it's going to be on a grand scale we've never seen before. Israel's next war is going to be much worse than Gaza, and it's coming. Allow me to explain. You see, when you're a little ant and you're walking on a football pitch, every piece of grass seems like a tall building to you. You don't know where you are. But if you're the same ant and you're up in the bleachers, you understand that you're looking at a football field and every single individual piece of grass is meaningless. What's important is the whole puzzle. Mainstream media gives you that piece of grass looks like a building thing. I'm going to give you the whole puzzle today. Check this out. What we're looking right now in Gaza and the Israelis is a piece of a bigger chess game. It ain't the real thing. The bigger chess game is going on between Iran, Russia, and the United States. So Iran is going for regional dominance in the Middle East. And they've been doing that for decades. They want to be the Middle East boss. And it has economic reasons, it has geopolitical reasons, but the fact of the matter is, they want to be the shot caller in the Middle East. Now, to achieve that, Iran needs to do three things. And once those three things happen, Iran owns the Middle East. Number one, remove the influence of the United States from the region. Number two, remove the United States' biggest ally and de facto outpost in the Middle East, which is Israel. And number three, get a nuclear bomb. Because once they get a nuclear bomb, they are untouchable. Nobody can threaten Iran anymore. Now, the policy of President Obama was perfectly suited for these specific goals. Because what Obama administration did is pull out of the Middle East and build a pathway for a nuke for Iran through the nuclear agreement. Now, once the administration changed and the Trump administration stepped in, that whole policy got reversed, it got flipped. Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of Trump, basically changed the way the United States looks at this part of the world, and rightfully so. And it has nothing to do with Israel or Hamas. It's about China, Iran, and Russia. So the Chinese are deep into the Belt and Road Initiative, which has huge chunks in the Middle East. So they're getting clout and influence in the Middle East. On top of it, Russia and Iran are building their own economic corridor. Azerbaijan, Russia, Iran, India, which is going to be a huge counter to the influence of the United States in the area. So the Chinese are moving in, the Russians and the Iranians are moving in, essentially taking over the Middle East. Now, obviously, Kushner and his team in the Trump administration basically said, look, we have to counter China, we have to counter Russia and Iran. Iran was kind of an afterthought because it's about Russia and it's about China. And if Iran is an afterthought, then Israel is just a little dot in a huge book. And basically they said, look, we have to find a way to counter these things because they're about to take not only the Middle East, because all these corridors they're building leading also to India, which we want to have on our side. The Indians are still kind of undecided where they are. They're kind of in BRICS, but they're not. They're kind of on the US side, but they're not. They're the next big economy to explode if they solve a lot of their internal problems. They have great demographics. They have a lot of advantages. So India has a huge potential. So there's a battle between China and Russia and the United States over who gets to dominate and basically call the shots with India. And that's why the United States announced in September this year the economic corridor. It's going to go from the EU to Israel, to Saudi Arabia, to India. And that economic corridor was supposed to be the counterweight to China's Belt and Road Initiative and to the Russian economic corridor with Iran and India. The main party that was supposed to get screwed by this is Iran. The Belt and Road Initiative by China is not going to get destroyed by this economic corridor. It's going to be a competitor, but it will survive. On the other hand, Russia and India will keep trading. They've been trading partners for decades. The only party that gets screwed from this is Iran, because Iran loses its ability to generate cash flow and trading relationships, which it had not had for years because of the sanctions with this corridor. So if the United States actually gets to do what it wants to do, build that corridor from India, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the EU, Iran is the only party that gets screwed out of this. That's why they are the ones who are pissed. not really the Russians, not really the Chinese. So the Iranians are not stupid. They have prepared for this. And they have prepared for this for years. You can't underestimate Iran. They know what they're doing. So what they've done is they built a network of proxies in every single country in the region that has a weak governance. Lebanon, weak governance, weak government. Hezbollah. Fund Hezbollah, take over the country. The Houthi rebels in Yemen, weak government, weak governance. Fund the Houthi rebels, they take over the country. Same thing in Syria. Same thing in Iraq. And I can go on and on. They have all these tentacles, all these pawns in the region, which they can activate at any given time. And Sunnis are not excluded from this, even though Iranians are Shiites and they don't really like Sunnis. But even Hamas, who's an absolute Sunni organization, was adopted by Iran because of the same model. Ability to inflict damage on Israel, weak governance, boom. Hamas takes over Gaza, they kick out the Palestinian Authority, and now they own Gaza. And they're funded by Iran. So it's about Sunnis and Shiites and religions. It's all about politics. Don't let them fool you with this nonsense. Now, the purpose of this was to build a ring of fire around Israel. The Iranians have three goals, remember. A nuke, destroy Israel, and get the US out of this region. So in order to destroy Israel, what the Iranians have done is they've built a network of proxies around the Israelis over the past 20 years. The idea was with Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthi rebels, and the Syrian militias, and the Iraqi militias, at any given point, they can force Israel into a multi-front war. From the south, from the north, from the inside, from the outside, and with some help from the Arabs that live in Israel, maybe they can actually push Israel to the brink of doom. That ring of fire was being prepped. Everybody was getting funded, everybody was getting trained, but then the United States threw a monkey wrench into the story by announcing in September this year that they have the corridor and they're going to set it up and it's going to be grand and beautiful. It's going to be a massive logistical supply chain that's going to run all the way from India to the US via the EU, and it's going to exclude Iran completely out of the picture. Now, if you think that this is a coincidence, that this was announced in September and the Israelis were attacked in October, look, there's always a chance that that may be the case, but I'm not a huge believer in coincidences. When something happens that soon, I tend to follow the money. The Iranians decide they need to put a stop to this. And there's two ways to put a stop to this. One is try to destroy Israel. Activate the ring of fire. Go all out. Wipe it out. That way, you sever one of the links in that chain of that corridor. Option number two is sacrifice a pawn, Hamas, which is a Sunni pawn, which makes it even more sacrificable because the Iranians view Hamas and Sunnis in general as disposable, one-time, single-use, single-patient. So dispose of Hamas, get Hamas to create a huge attack on Israel, get the Israelis to retaliate in such a fashion that's going to delegitimize Israel, make it a pariah, make it not good enough, not acceptable by the Arab world for the Saudis to do business with them. And that way, you also kill that initiative. Because if the Israelis are not good enough, if they're tainted, if they're radioactive, the Saudis will not play ball with this, and that corridor dies. So they choose option number two because it also fits better the ideas on which the Iranians operate, much more cunning than brute force. Now, we've seen how this played out. In September, the corridor was announced by the United States. In October, the Israelis got attacked. Then the Israelis went to war with Hamas, which of course made them very unpopular in the world. And now Hamas is basically not winning the war. They're losing, but they're still alive. And Iran is pulling every single lever it has to bail out Hamas somehow out of it. They view this as the Dunkirk of Hamas. They need to save as much of it as they can, not let it fall. They'll use Al Jazeera, they'll fund different organizations, They pull every single thing they have. Qatar, they know that if they can save Hamas, the next war is going to be much worse. Whatever happens in Gaza, the Iranians will go for that next stage, which is drive the United States out of the Middle East. Now, they can't do it by force. It's not like they can match the US power in the Navy. So they have to be cunning. And they've already started. What you're seeing right now with the Houthi rebels has nothing to do with Israel. The Houthi rebels have essentially sieged the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal is now blocked off by the Houthi rebels. And in doing so, they're inflicting massive, huge economic damage to Egypt, who basically lives off the Suez Canal. So the biggest ally in the Middle East of the United States is definitely Israel. But Egypt is a huge ally, key ally of the United States in the Middle East. If the United States can lift that siege with the international force they've created, everything gets solved in that specific arena. But if the United States is not effective in lifting the siege from the Egyptians will have no choice but to go to Iran, make good with Iran to get them to lift the siege. That's going to be the second war that the United States will have to fight, either on the geopolitical stage or on the battlefield with the Navy. On top of it, once Iran pushes forward to a nuke, they know that the Israelis view it as a massive existential threat, and rightfully so. So once Iran starts to push to the next stage, which is get a nuclear bomb, the Israelis will attack. They will not let Iran get to a nuclear bomb. This is an all-out war scenario. So the Iranians are basically saying, look, we are getting that nuke. So that means we will go to war with Israel. Now, unless the Iranians all of a sudden develop some sort of a newfound resentment to the regional dominance aspirations of the previous administration or whatever, some sort of a dream, the Iranians are probably not giving up that nuke. The Iranians are driving forward to the nuke as fast as possible. That means that right now we have the Iranians and the Israelis in a collision course. The Israelis will not allow this to happen. So a war is coming. And in that scenario, in which Israel will prevent the Iranians or try to prevent the Iranians from getting to a nuke, it means direct war between Israel and Iran. That war will de facto mandate Iran to use its Ring of Fire plan, which is bring all these fronts to collapse on top of Israel. Now here's the big question here. They have the Hezbollah in Lebanon, they have the militias in Syria, they have the Houthi rebels, but do they have Hamas? Because if they have Hamas, if Hamas survives and gets to rearm for the next 3 to 4 to 5 years, it's a whole different ballgame. If it's Hamas and Hezbollah attacking from two sides, and potentially the West Bank, and the Israeli Arabs, and the Houthi rebels, and the militias in Syria, it's a whole different ballgame. Without Hamas, it's going to be a much easier defense for Israel from the regional Ring of Fire, rather than fighting it when Hamas is still alive. But the problem, even though everybody understands that this war is coming, and even though the Israelis understand, they must not let Hamas survive for that specific reason. Iranians and the United States have a similar interest right now, and that is not in favor of Israel's interest. On the one hand, the Iranians are saying, look, we're still building up our power for that huge war. We only need to stop the Abraham Accords so that the economic corridor doesn't happen in the next year or two. We don't need more than that. In the meantime, we'll use those 2 years to rearm, resupply, and get ready for war. So we do not want a regional war today. We want it in 2 years. On the other hand, the United States is sitting there saying, look, we're heading to an election year, and we're already funding one war in Ukraine. We also don't want a war right now. We probably want it in 2 years. So the United States and Iran are doing everything they can to prevent a regional war from erupting right now, even though it's inevitable, and even though it's happening. And even though they know that in 2 years it's going to be much harder for Israel to find this war than right now, and even though they might keep Hamas alive as part of the process to calm things down and prevent regional war, which is going to screw over Israelis in the long run, there is a similarity of interest, weirdly enough, between the US and Iran right now of not letting things blow up today. And it works the opposite in the Israelis' direction. Now, obviously, the Israelis cannot force a regional war. They're a secondary player in this. They're not the main piece. But what they can do, and they should do, and they must do, is make sure they eliminate the crap out of Hamas. Because whatever happens, they must not let Hamas leave. If Hamas stays alive and gets to rearm and get ready, they will see it again in the regional ring of fire. And it's going to be a whole different ballgame. So the Israelis have to play within the boundaries of what they're allowed to do. Sure, they're not going to start up a new regional war, but they must not allow a remnant of Hamas to survive this if they want a chance to win that ring of fire war that is coming. Now, just a quick note, most of these videos are not fully monetized. We're talking about war, sensitive topics. I totally understand YouTube for doing that. No complaints. But it's very hard to keep this project going because it takes a lot of time. And if you want to support what we're doing here, I started a new Patreon. And that Patreon will be where I feature my most sensitive and not YouTube suitable material where I can talk freely. And it's an opportunity for you to also support what we're doing here and keep the project going. So it's kind of a win-win. I get to talk about what I want there without all the monetization restrictions, and you get to support the project. So that Patreon is called patreon.com/Tom Nash Report. And I would consider it a huge pleasure to have you on there and become a member and a supporter of what we do here. And if you can't afford it, it's fine. Just keep watching the videos, keep liking the videos, share it with people who want to open their mind. That's good enough for me. Thank you so much. And in case you haven't checked out this video, Hamas leader Sinwar is finished. Check this out. I explain exactly why. If you haven't, subscribe right here. I'll see you in the next video.